Okay, folks, we're going to come back together. We've prepared a panel of fabulous panelists who have agreed to be here today. Two are brand new social work grads who just convocated yesterday and decided to come here and spend Friday afternoon with us. So we are super grateful. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think that Memorial University has the absolute best students. So of course they wanted to come and spend Friday afternoon with us. So the panelists are going to start by sharing a little bit about who they are themselves and their connection with UDL. And then this will be an opportunity to be very interactive. Lindsay is over here. She'll have the mic. She can come over and you can ask questions. We'll have folks online asking questions as well. And they'll be able to give us sort of a local context of their experience around UDL. So I will let them get started. And a big round of applause for our panelists.
Are we good to go? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Hepditch. My pronouns are he, they, and I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator with Thrive's Education Initiatives here in St. John's. I'm proud to share today how our education initiatives are grounded in the principles of UDL and how the framework itself is fundamentally about inclusion, accessibility, and learner success. I'll give a little bit of overview about Thrive, and then I'll share about our program specifically. But Thrive is a grassroots community-based organization, and it exists to fill the many gaps in services that folks in our community are facing. We run 4 core programs: Street Reach, which supports folks who are unhoused or unstably housed; Blue Door supports individuals who are experiencing sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, or are involved in the sex trade; Casey is the coalition against the sexual exploitation of youth. Hello. And they're a collective of professionals and experiential voices that work to help end the sexual exploitation of youth in our province. And then our educational initiatives, which is where I'm focusing on today. So at Thrive, we work with youth who have often been pushed to the margins, young people who have faced a wide range of systemic barriers like poverty, trauma, discrimination, criminalization, housing instability, and most recently in education, a worldwide pandemic that caused unstable and interrupted schooling. Many of the learners that we work with haven't excelled in traditional educational settings, often because those systems weren't designed with their needs in mind. And that's where the universal design of our program comes in. Our program is geared for youth aged 16 to 29 who are unable to complete their education through the public system. At Thrive, we assist young people in completing their Canadian Adult Education Credential, or the CAIC, which is now it's known as, which became the National High School Equivalency Standard, replacing GED back in May of 2024. Thrive's education program started in 2004 and was run by retired teachers volunteering to help teach young criminalized men how to read. And we have since evolved and grown and now have 3 full-time educators, each with full classes 4 days a week and a wait list, and then myself. So my role as outreach coordinator plays a pivotal role in our education program. We understand that life is hard and young people that are in survival mode, education often isn't their first priority. A large part of my role is supporting the non-academic needs that can have a significant impact on a young person's ability to learn. When these basic needs go unmet, learning is not feasible. So we work to remove those barriers, not just by referring youth to other services, but by walking alongside them, advocating with them, and helping them build trust in systems that may have let them down in the past. Universal design for learning is about designing educational environments that work for everybody, not just the average learner. It recognizes that learners have vary in how they engage with material, how they process information, and how they express what they know. At Thrive, we put this into practice a number of ways. We know that learners are more likely to succeed when they feel safe, supported, and seen, and our team builds strong relationships with learners, offer trauma-informed care and support, and we allow for flexible pacing and attendance, and we prioritize emotional readiness over rigid structure. Our learning facilitators use a variety of teaching tools like visuals, hands-on activities, videos, storytelling, and community-based learning, and we don't rely on long lectures or dense reading alone. We also give learners different ways to show what they know, and that might be in a conversation, an art piece, a song, or a piece of writing. Our goal isn't to test memorization, but to support real understanding. We focus on building confidence, skills, and a voice so learners can express themselves authentically. More than just in the way that we teach, we've created an environment focused on UDL. We have a fully accessible space to ensure all that want to can access any part of our office. We have white noise machines in our ceilings, so there's never harsh silence in a room. We've added sound dampening features throughout our space to reduce echoes and create more private spaces. And we've covered our fluorescent lights to help soften the sterile overhead lighting. We've also introduced a variety of alternative seating options so that everyone can sit comfortably. Last year alone, we had 98 people connected to our education program. And in that time, we made 82 referrals to other services, completed 745 outreach interventions, and celebrated 16 graduations. We were also thrilled to award 2 of those graduates with a $1,000 scholarship each to support their next steps into post-secondary programs that they were accepted into. One of the reasons we're able to show up for learners in the way that we do is because the same care and compassion exists within our organization. Our organization is intentional from top down. Our executive director and management team lead with empathy and prioritize us as people first. They recognize that to create a supportive environment for learners, our staff also need to feel supported, trusted, and valued. UDL isn't just about how we teach, but it's how we build environments where learning can happen. By aligning with the UDL model, our education initiatives don't just support learning, but remove barriers to do it. We honor lived experience, we offer flexibility, and above all, we recognize that every learner brings something valuable to the table and every learner belongs. Our hope is that one day systems beyond ours begin to reflect those same values, because when we design with inclusion in mind from the beginning, we create spaces where everyone can thrive. Thank you.
Wow.
I had a lot to say.
You did. I'll balance that out a little bit here. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. My name's Jason Geary. My pronouns are he and him. I'm currently the manager of accessibility services here at Memorial. As Darla said, UDL often gets conflated with accommodations and some of that disability access work. And I will say my UDL journey started about 30 years ago. And it's interesting from an accommodations accessibility perspective, how not my passion, because my passion for UDL is still quite strong, but also, acknowledging the disability access piece, the accommodations piece, is very, very important. And UDL is a wonderful sister approach or framework that can really help move the needle on accessibility, not just disability, but all of those fine student groups that Darla talked about, our first generation learners, our Indigenous learners, students who are working full-time and attending full-time, working multiple part-time jobs. So all of these wonderful student groups. So in addition to my work in accessibility services, and I teach in the Faculty of Education here. So I teach in our Bachelor of Education, BED program, and also a Bachelor of Special Ed, where I teach teachers to do this as well, and how we recognize this in the K to 12 system. And Steve here says that I taught him 10 years ago, and so he'll be able to refute everything I say here about what a wonderful educator I am. He'll be able to refute that. But really, my journey started in UDL in the mid to late 90s. As a graduate student in the United States, where kind of UDL came from, and looking at it in a K to 12 context and how it evolved since the early 90s. And fast forward, I end up coming to Memorial in 2011 to teach and be involved in the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, and really being involved in Memorial's UDL project, being involved pan-Canadian, so attended the first pan-Canadian UDL conference in 2015. If anybody was there at McGill. So really at the early stages of this discussion nationally as well, and trying to move the needle on UDL here at Memorial. I wanted to share one of, so I've been exposed to UDL in many different ways as a graduate student, as an educator, a special educator myself, as an educational consultant or a teaching consultant working with faculty here on their pedagogy. And also now from an accessibility standpoint and seeing the benefits of UDL and how they can really benefit a larger number of students merely than just the accommodations one-off model that we rely on to support, formally support students with disabilities. But I wanted to share one thing about my journey. So about 12 years ago, I really started to look at the courses that I teach here and UDLify each of them, right? So start small, go slow. And one of the assessments that I had was a group presentation. And so I was a per course instructor. And if you know anything about being a per course instructor, Andre, I'm looking at you, we don't really get much choice with regards to choosing these assessments and these books. So I'm like, what am I going to do here? I'm really in a box. And so I really thought, like, I've got to be able to do something different to make an impact, and just made some small changes to some of this work using UDL principles and guidelines. And so even in a really tight environment where you don't get to choose the textbook, you don't get to choose whether you have tests or not. As a pro course instructor in the Faculty of Education, I didn't get a choice. You have to give tests and exams. So even in that really rigid environment, you can find ways to make an impact and really give choice to students. So I'm really happy to be here. You know, wonderful that there's so many people here, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions that come up and really just being a part of this wonderful community of practice going forward.
Hello, my name is Steve Sharp, and Jason, you taught me 14 years ago, and he looks younger now than he did when he taught me. So I'm a teacher at McDonald Drive Junior High, and I think my experience with UDL comes from doing a master's in education, how the use of Google Classroom aligns with UDL framework. So I got a couple of papers published on that, and I think you might have Googled my name with UDL, and they said, "Oh, he lives here. Great." So when I took this idea and went through it with Dr. Gabrielle Young in the Faculty of Education, she's like, "All right, how does Google promote all this?" And you know, it really opened my eyes of different ways to communicate to every student in the class. Then the pandemic hit after I finished my master's and thesis. Excuse me. And myself and a coworker, Caleb Thorne, if anyone knows him, we started making these YouTube videos for students who miss a lot of class. So I don't know if anyone remembers or if anyone's a teacher here, but if you got sick, then that's it. You're gone for 14 days. That was the government guidelines. Sorry, you can't come to school. So myself and Caleb started making these YouTube videos that were directly related to curriculum. Our principal supported it, God love her. And we tried to say, well, how are we going to make sure we communicate with every student or as many students as possible? So we said, okay, let's make sure we have a visual. Let's make sure we say something that they need to know, and let's make sure we have something they can read. That way you're trying to communicate to as many students as possible. And if they need to revisit it, it's a YouTube video. Sweet, just scroll back. So that's my primary experience with UDL and how I use it. I use it through oral defense with examinations, stuff like that, just, you know, because some students, they may not be able to communicate what's in their brain through to their hand. So there's a lot of accommodating for that. As far as teachers' use of UDL, teachers I work with do it all the time, but they never say, oh, this is UDL. They say, oh, I got a bunch of different ways to communicate or, you know, assess this assignment. Because not everyone can write a paragraph. Someone can do it, you know, create a video and then express the same thing, tell me exactly what they're learning. And not once do they use UDL. A lot of teachers do without knowing. And I noticed the big and small changes that I noticed is that, you know, you're allowing every student in your class to show that, yes, I know what's going on, and you feel confident, you know, promoting them to the next grade. That's it for me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Desiree, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm here as a student at Memorial and a social work new grad, and I'm actually a new social worker at the Association for New Canadians as a settlement health navigator. So I think using UDL in both those roles are really important. First off, as a student, I think one of the most powerful examples of UDL I've experienced was in a class where the professor truly created inclusive education. The classroom felt safe, welcoming, and flexible. We were encouraged to lead and facilitate discussions and express ourselves in creative ways. For assignments, we had options, whether it was an essay, a genogram, family tree, a visual presentation, or a group video demonstrating counseling techniques. It definitely made the work feel personal and meaningful. The professor also used closed captions live during all lectures, which I think absolutely supported comprehension for everyone. Deadlines were flexible, and the professor's open availability for conversations and support showed genuine care for the students. Having that experience helped me understand how powerful UDL can be, even if I didn't have the word UDL for it. It helped me show up fully without fear of being judged, and it definitely shaped my approach as a new social worker. I try to offer the same sense of flexibility, compassion, and choice with the people that I work with. In my role at the ANC, so I support newcomers navigating the healthcare system, whether it's showing where the closest hospital is, the process of what happens when you register at the triage, showing where the closest walk-in clinic is, and how to get your medication at the pharmacy. So one way I apply UDL for this is through the intentional use of interpreters and also visual aids and maps and written ways of showing the different ways of engaging in the healthcare system. UDL in this context means meeting people where they're at by any means possible, whether it's simplifying often very confusing healthcare material or using plain language or facilitating access to appointments. It's all about being flexible and collaborative. It's about reducing barriers before they even appear. And I provide multiple options for clients to express their concerns. Some feel more comfortable using visuals, others prefer phone calls, and many request written materials translated in their first language. Having a diverse approach and being open makes all the difference in how people connect and communicate, not only with me as a social worker, but also with the broader systems around. So yeah, that's all from me.
Hi, everyone. Great to see so many people here and joining us today. My name is Tyler Matthews. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently, as of yesterday, a recent graduate from the School of Social Work here at Memorial University. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really, really honored to be a part of this panel and to share a bit about how UDL has impacted my learning journey. I'm currently still quite new with UDL, but passionate about it nonetheless. I first learned about universal design of learning through a course I was enrolled in, taught by Amy, Dr. Golden. And thank you, by the way, for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. At first, I didn't even realize what UDL was, but I felt the difference. As a student with ADHD, having flexibility in how I engage with materials and demonstrate my knowledge has made such a big difference. UDL practices like recording lectures, using closed captions, or giving multiple means of assessment have helped me feel both seen and supported and not just accommodated. Some of the strategies that stood out for me in Dr. Golden's class was providing us with materials ahead of time so that we could review them at our own pace, or using visual aids and simplified language and slides, or group work structures that allowed different ways to participate, like through speaking or visuals or recording videos. It's the little changes that often make the biggest impacts. I found that classrooms that apply UDL not only help me learn better, but they also feel more inclusive. They reduce stress and they help level the playing field, not just for students with disabilities, but for everyone. Dr. Golden let her students choose how we presented multiple projects. She provided us an opportunity to have a choice in our own learning, and that gave us students a lot of agency. I found it to be very empowering. I felt as though I was able to fully engage with all the material because I had the freedom to make a choice in my own learning. I was always way more engaged with projects, and I was able to focus on expressing my understanding clearly rather than struggling with things like writing structure or formatting. Learning with ADHD often feels like trying to grow a plant in unpredictable weather. Some days my mind is bursting with energy and creativity, like on a sunny day, and other times it's like a sudden cold, and no matter how much effort I put in, nothing seems to grow. I want to learn, I want to participate, I want to succeed, but the climate doesn't always allow me to do so. A few weeks back, I went to Canadian Tire with my mom, and we bought this big Boston fern because the weather's nice and we want to decorate the patio. So we placed it, we found a good spot, we gave it water, we put it in the sun, we put it out on the patio. And then the next morning when we came out, it was yellow and it was wilted because it got really cold that night. But I didn't blame the fern. It wasn't the fern's fault. It wasn't weak, it wasn't broken, it wasn't lacking capability. It just couldn't thrive in the conditions that didn't match what it needed. So we went back, we got another fern, and we put it in the greenhouse. We wanted it as a decoration, but we understood that it needed a different environment. It's thriving, it's growing. And that experience really made me think about students like me and universal design for learning. So often students are expected to adapt to rigid educational environments, even if those environments aren't built with neurodiversity in mind. When a student doesn't thrive, the assumption is often that they need to work harder or study more or focus more or try again. But sometimes people forget to look at whether the conditions are the problem. UDL is that greenhouse. It doesn't change what we're trying to grow. It changes how we support the growth. It offers flexibility, clear structure, multiple ways to engage and demonstrate understanding. It doesn't ask anyone to be the perfect student all the time. It just asks that the environment adapts to how different minds work. Just like my fern, the plant didn't fail. It was failed by the weather that I placed it in. Many students aren't failing because of lack of ability. They're just trying to grow in the wrong weather. When we create classrooms designed for variability for all seasons, we give every learner a chance to truly thrive. And that, at least to me, is what UDL is about. It's not about lowering expectation. It's about giving us each what we need to meet those expectations. UDL reminds us that no student should have to weather the storm alone. It's time that we stop asking learners to fit into rigid systems and start designing systems that fit the learners. So let's commit to building classrooms where every student has the tools, the support, the conditions that they need to thrive. If there is one thing that I wanted to say as a past student to any educators, policymakers, administrators alike, it would be to build that greenhouse and don't leave your students in the cold. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any questions in the room? All right. Okay. We have lots of time.
Okay, good. I don't want to monopolize the mic. That was so lovely. Thank you all so much for that. I was formulating this question thinking of Steve, but I think this is something that everyone can speak to. Because through the afternoon, a bunch of times, the experience of COVID and the pandemic and lockdown and the effect that that had on learners, on instructors, on all of this has come up. And I think we've got an array of different experiences through that time in terms of where everyone would have been in their educational and professional journeys. One of the sort of larger discussions in the disability justice community and those dialogues is about how during COVID, there was this brief moment when accessibility was opened up in a lot of ways for people in workplaces, in cultural events, and suddenly all of the things that we said could never be done. Oh, you can't go to a play from home. We can't put that online. All of a sudden, everything could be online quite miraculously, even though the tech had been there all the time. And then, of course, COVID, quote, ended, and all of those things went away. But it does seem like the education system, both K-12 and at the university level, is one of the little places where those lessons were actually taken to heart, and where those measures have continued to be implemented. So I was just wondering, and I mean, maybe Steve, you could start because you were talking about that YouTube experience, but maybe if folks could just say a few things about what we learned from that and how UDL is part of that conversation.
I can start. So it's kind of, the pandemic was kind of tangly because right away, like, I have a really guilty conscience. So right away I was like, okay, how can I keep teaching students? And myself, and again, my buddy Caleb, we set up Google Classrooms, and we had all our notes, PowerPoint presentations, videos, a bunch of stuff attached so kids can keep learning. A lot of parents appreciate it because on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, we would run a class from, say, 9 to 12. I teach grade 7, 8, and 9 science. And Wednesdays, we had staff meetings the whole day. And then Fridays, I wanted to make sure kids would get outside, because if you're 9 to 12 on a Chromebook, then not ideal. So we started doing that, and I found that I had, say, 40-minute sessions, and I had classes that were pretty close to full. The students I had would use their parents' laptops, parents' computers, stuff like that, and it worked great. Come May, I think the government said everyone's going to pass. And the reason is because not everyone had access to a Chromebook. Not everyone had access to the internet. Those who did had an unfair advantage to those who didn't. So it wasn't fair to those who did not. So what I noticed was my classes going from, 20, 25 for each class to, say, 5, 10, to combining classes. So I'd have all my grade 8s for an hour, and then all my grade 7s, and all my grade 9s. Then I noticed that I would have to combine classes with Mr. Thorne, and we'd have to team teach. So just from May on, the numbers, I think I might have had 5 in a whole grade for the sessions I do at the end. It was good. You could speak to the students. You could show them videos. You could, do everything you need to do within the UDL framework. And you could still do that again. That's why we kept going with all this different types of media so that students can learn to the best of their ability. But yeah, we kind of got away from it. Now we're trying to get away from all the digital technology because we teachers just discussing it think it's way too much. We need to differentiate how we present material now. So yes, it was great. But now I think it was a bit overkill. But as long as teachers are trying to communicate with every student to their best of their ability, which most teachers on my staff do, we do have those types of conversations. Then you're going to help out as many students as you can. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add. Jason, yes, go ahead.
Sure. So let's be clear. If it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't have anybody here virtually, right? So the only reason that they're here today virtually, like we're able to do this, if we didn't have COVID and we came in and said, hey, we want to have people in the room and virtual, they'd be like, I don't know, Darcy's busy that day, because Darcy, of course, is still the magician with all these virtual meetings. Not that we didn't have virtual meetings, but not to the extent that we certainly did during COVID and even now. So I think there are, specific at the university are things that have been maintained. My colleagues and I did a presentation 2 years ago at a conference about the snapback. So this idea that, hey, COVID's over now, let's get back to the way it was before. And some folks have taken that literally. And so they just said, all of these things we did during COVID, we had to, and now we don't, so we're not. And then, I think the majority of folks are still grappling with what can we still hang on to that makes sense. And I know as an institution, I don't speak for Memorial, but I know we've increased the number of lecture capture classrooms. We continue to grow that technology. We have instructors that are seeking those particular spaces so that they can record their lectures. We have instructors who, and social work stands out to me, who are like, well, I want to record my lecture. How do I do this? And so So they're popping open their laptops, their personal laptops, recording your lectures because they're not in a. So I think it's a really exciting time that these things are possible now. And I think folks are thinking about how can we do this, even if it means us popping open our own laptop. But I think institutionally there's movement and we see the value in being able to do that. And it's imperfect. And just because we did it during COVID doesn't mean that it was the right thing to do. We did have to do it. But let's hold on to some of those things that really moved the needle. And I will say just briefly, because I have two neurodivergent kids, and my kid with ADHD and learning disabilities really found that when he was allowed to, he thrived doing all his work from like 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. He's like, this is awesome. So I can pop open those videos. I don't think you taught him. But you can pop open these videos. I don't have to pay attention in class. I can pop open these videos, and he really, his magic time was like 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. And he would be doing work at 9 p.m. when he really probably didn't have to, because everyone was told you're passing anyway during that first year. So I think that's one of the things that has been exciting too about some of these UDL pieces is it allows learners to go, this is where I thrive, and I don't have to thrive at 9 a.m. because that's the course time slot. So I just wanted to throw that in
there. We saw a little bit of the other side. So at Thrive, we saw a little bit of an uptick in our referrals. I'll use post-COVID, I guess. And yeah, we saw a lot of uptick because a lot of the learners felt like they were really far behind in school because there was a lot of back and forth and unpredictability and unstable schooling in terms of hybrid, online, in class. It was hard to predict, and a lot of our learners felt that they couldn't catch up, I guess, to where they feel like they should have been in their curriculum and in their schooling. So they just kind of stopped altogether because they didn't feel like it was working, or whatever was happening wasn't working for them, at least. So yeah, a lot of the learners that we have in our program right now were solely out of school because of the unpredictability of COVID. And the again, it was difficult in going back and forth from hybrid to in class and vice versa. And I mean, it was hard for everybody that was trying to follow through with the pandemic guidelines and what was happening. But yeah, we saw a little bit of the other side of people struggling during that time. And again, coming into our program is very different because we are fully a universal space. So a lot of the learners that were struggling with following a curriculum were really thriving in our program, which was great to see.
Anybody?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Amy, for leading this community of practice. Very interesting. I enjoyed hearing from all the speakers. I'm a professor here, and I've also been a dean of students, so I've sort of seen this. I've just recently finished some work on the education accord for the province. We're talking about education in 10 years out. So I really love your analogy, and I, with your permission, will use it about building that greenhouse, because I think we do have to build that greenhouse. I've heard it loud and clear in a lot of my intersections. The thing that always I ponder about, and I think it sort of came up in our first speaker as well, and I'm hearing it through others, is this notion of accessibility, accommodations, and UDL. And I think about those, and sometimes they're packaged together and sometimes they're not. Sometimes people are talking about different things when UDL means different things to different people. I'm trying to understand that, and recent data that just came out of Atlantic Canada, Canadian University Survey Consortium, and they did an analysis, and it suggests that maybe 30% of the students are getting some sort of accommodations in this high school or the secondary system, and they're coming to universities. Now, some people will suggest there's 50% because the 30 are people who have specific accommodations, and the other 20, the secondary system has already accommodated or provided that UDL or has built it into their greenhouse. So I wonder, that intrigues me to think about that and to think about where we are in terms of education now. I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. As I said, I've been a part of the accessibility services team here for about 5 years, and before that, several years with CITL. And again, a part of that UDL project here at Memorial. Certainly not as big as it is now today with this community of practice, but for the longest time, the 6 of us would be together at various times throughout the year talking about UDL. But I think it's really interesting when I think about Darla's slide where it says all these things didn't work. Those probably have been the things we've spent the last 10 years doing. So because there's no institutional buy-in right at the highest levels here. So I think some of those like PD on UDL, like we started doing PD on UDL in 2012, and the same 5 people would come and we'd say, it's so great to see you, but you could do this as well as I could. And there was just everything. Darla said this morning, it's so great that at Mohawk, it's not off the side of their desks, whereas oftentimes here it is. I think specifically, Donna, to accommodations and UDL, I think, and they mentioned it as well, like taking UDL out of the accessibility realm was one of the things that they probably did well early on, or I don't know how early, but phase 1, because they are conflated. And I've had conversations in the last 5 years with academics who say, we don't do accommodations anymore because we do UDL. And of course, that's not how that works, right? The goal of UDL isn't to eliminate the number of accommodations or students with accommodations. It often is the result. I know in my teaching for those courses that I've UDLified, I do have fewer accommodation requests, but that's not the goal. And so when you conflate specifically supporting students with disabilities and accommodations, I mean, that's a legal endeavor. And so I think, Memorial would be well served to kind of move away from couching it in accessibility. Accessibility is absolutely part of it, but I think having the folks at CITL continue to take, and they have been, leading this charge here at Memorial for at least the last decade or so. And then looking at how we can make that impact. And there was an interesting report out of Ontario just last week, actually, from HECO, the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, that showed that the number of students with accommodations requesting in the colleges is going down because of efforts like at Mohawk. As they increase and add UDL to their policies and formalize it, the number of accommodations go down. That's not the goal, but that often is the result. And so I think they're two different conversations. Accommodations, formal accommodations, disability access, that's legal. Like we need to do a really good job at that, and also think about how we can sustain the larger number. And the final thing I'll say is, and Donna, you know this because we worked very closely on this for a number of years, the number of students that are supported by offices like mine, accessibility services, 60 to 80% of disabled students don't register with the Office for Students with Disabilities. And so our numbers continue to rise in my office, in our office, but that's nowhere near the number of disabled students, students with disabilities, neurodivergent students. That's nowhere near that number, but they're here as well. And that's a big challenge that our office finds is trying to make an impact for those learners as well, and not just the ones who jump through all the hoops to get recognized by the institution. I'll stop.
To add for K-12, I guess around 7, 8, 9 years ago, we would talk about accommodations and, different interventions frameworks to help everyone. But in recent years, I think the end of 2022, I think everyone knows the buzzword in K-12, 2 letters, AI. So that's kind of where most of our focus is gone at this point. So, AI is the majority of the it will affect or impact, at least 85, 90% of the students. Now that's just a number I'm making up off the top of my head, but most students have the ability to use AI to complete assignments. And that's kind of where a lot of people are focused. That's a lot of staff meetings, a lot of stuff we're hearing through the university and stuff like that. Whereas I don't want to say UDL or accommodations are on the back burn, but it's just less of a focus as it was in my experience. I mean, this is not something to quote and say Steve Sharp said, but from what
Literally says
my name is Jason Geary. So yeah, no, it's the focus in my experience right now is we're looking at what is AI doing to students and how can we make classrooms engaging despite that. Anyone have anything else?
So Donna, the number in Newfoundland, the number of students in the K-12 system, and I'd be interested to see if this resonates with you. K-12 students with formal accommodations, 35%. So a third of your students have IEPs?
Yeah, some classes.
35% of our student population is recognized by our school district as disabled.
We do have a question online there from Stephanie Rowe Slaney. Can you share an example of a UDL aha moment, something that you have successfully used in your practice that is conducive to supporting a UDL environment?
I think for me as a student, like Amy was one of my last like academic professors for my social work degree, and something as simple as just using the closed captions during like the live lectures was something that was so like incredibly impressive for me, but also I think it really like increased engagement for the students because you're able to pay more attention, and it was just so accommodating for everybody. So I think for a student it would be that one, and also just the pre-recorded lectures of being able to watch them at 1 o'clock in the morning if you want to do that. Yeah, something as simple as those two things I think were really impactful for me as a student. I don't know if Tyler wants to add to that.
Yeah, I found the same thing. I remember going to the first class, and Amy brought out a big tote bucket filled with fidget toys, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna like it here. It was nice, but what it did is it removed some of that pressure that I felt like I had to adapt or fit into a mold that I haven't in the past fit into, or that I see other people so easily fit into. I said, okay, this is fun. It gives me something to do. It encourages movement. It gives me something to fidget with. And I thought I didn't have to take any additional steps to get that. It was already done. Those steps were already taken for me. And that was really special as a student. But I guess to go back to another aha moment that I had, I recently accepted a job with Newfoundland Health Services doing mental health counseling for children and youth. So what we do there, I can't help but notice some of the similarities with the UDL principles, like prioritizing flexibility, recognizing variability, creating inclusive, responsive environments where all individuals can access support in ways that honor their individuality. I guess within the mental health services that we provide, we use play-based or play-informed and sensory-rich strategies to create accessible pathways for emotional exploration and skill building. Just as UDL removes barriers in classrooms, we try to remove barriers communicative and relational in therapeutic contexts. And I came a little bit late today, but I did hear a little bit of the conversation about applying UDL to multiple in multiple areas as much as we can. And when I was thinking about this, I guess previously my experience with UDL has been in an educational setting, but it was a nice aha moment to see how those same core principles can be applied in other areas. And I just wanted to share that because I thought it was important.
I continually have aha moments with UDL. When we do an intake, when we have a new learner entering our program, a lot of them come in a little bit afraid of re-entering the school system for whatever reason. They didn't complete school through the traditional system, and a lot of them come in a little bit afraid and a little bit anxious about our accommodations and what we do in our program. And they had accommodations in school, but we don't do the same thing here. And it's really refreshing to be able to put a little bit of that stress and anxiety at ease by explaining a bit about our program and alleviating a little bit of that needing of an accommodation, because our entire program is such. And it's really great to see that on a young person's face, to feel a little bit refreshed and at ease and re-enter the school system with a little bit less anxiety.
Okay. So one of the first aha moments, or one of many for me as an instructor, was one of these courses I inherited. Again, I've already said we don't get a whole lot of choice. So this course syllabus I inherited, we had to have a group, a presentation, and it had to be a PowerPoint. So for some reason, the Faculty of Education, we think that one of the core learning outcomes is how to create a PowerPoint. And so I taught it. Traditionally this one semester where every group had to create a PowerPoint and get up there and do PowerPoint karaoke, right? And they were god awful, not your group, but they were really badly designed PowerPoints. And so if you know anything about PowerPoints, you have to be really intentional. Pick the right font, the right contrast, not too many words, but not too few. And so I sat through them like this. I can't do this again. Not just to them, but to me. So I have to grade these PowerPoints, and they were awful. So the very next semester, I taught the course again. I said, I'm going to do whatever I can because I'm in this box as a per course instructor. And so I said, listen, I'm looking at the learning outcomes. They have to be able to demonstrate that they know and can demonstrate this, this, and this, and this. It doesn't have to be a PowerPoint. So I opened it up, spotlight on disability, pick a disability type that we haven't talked about already, and you tell me how you want to show this off. And so I deliberately put them in groups. I did a questionnaire so I could make sure that we didn't have a group of all type A's. We didn't have a group of all folks who were tech experts. So I really distributed the folks who said, I'm a leader. And there were 7 that raised their hands in the survey. And I'm like, perfect, 7 group, there's a leader already, naturally. Not that they were going to be labeled a leader, but they were going to take that leadership role. So I did that with a number of different things. And then I said, like, you tell me how you're going to meet these outcomes. So one of the things I really try to do with my teaching and also service provision is differentiate between the product and the process. The product is a non-negotiable, right? Those learning outcomes, those you can't negotiate. So when I talk to instructors about UDL, looking at your learning outcomes, all the students have to meet these. The flexibility, the UDL piece, is the process. How are they going to get there? So I had all these groups. You tell me how you want to show off how you know this information. And I was absolutely blown away. I had one PowerPoint. So one of the 7 groups did a PowerPoint. Phenomenal PowerPoint. But I had a group who, one of the students was an artist, like a legit artist. And so they did a children's book. And so I had a student who did the illustrations. Another student wrote the story. And then another student was really gifted with web design, and they designed a teacher portal, how to teach this book, like how to introduce this book in your classroom. Blown away. And that was one of the aha moments for me, was if I can get out of students' way and just say, this is the non-negotiable. You have to be able to demonstrate these learning outcomes. That's what I'm held accountable as the teacher, as the instructor. How you get there, I think you can probably do this better than I can. And that was my aha moment, and I haven't turned back since. So it was really impactful as an educator.
I found, so it's, not great, but myself and again, Mr. Thorne, we're making these videos, and I teach French immersion science, but French is for everyone. That's a mandate of NL schools. And we do have students with exceptionalities and LD. But so when I have a student in the back of the class, knowing the difference between specular reflection and diffuse reflection by making fun of my voice and making fun of me, I'm just like, well, I got to give it to him. He knows the difference between the two. That would be one aha moment. But another one is being a science teacher, we have to, we're doing cells right now. So you need to know the parts of the cell there. That's the theory part. But then I always do a lab where they have to use the microscopes, they get hands-on, and they have to see the cell themselves, and they have to draw it, or they have to get a picture of it somehow because we have the electric microscopes, and then they have to label it that way. So, being able to see it, but being able to get their hands on top of it and, learning that way. I find, all these interventions that every other department is doing, our science department looks at each other and say, okay, we're already, students are already expressing themselves many different ways to show us how they're learning, which, it's a good, department to be in.
All right. Thank you guys so much for being here today, by the way. So far, I've been loving absolutely everything that you guys have been saying. It's so insightful. This is about big impacts, but just little changes. So I was wondering if you guys could share some success stories. So for Daniel, you're in a unique position here. You deal with the community. And then Jason and Stephen, you guys deal with people in educational, context. And then Desiree and Tyler, you guys are two students who are also in the educational background. So maybe you two might know a fellow student who was impacted by just a little change in the class, or Stephen, Stephen, you could have seen a student who got did better in your course from something that you implemented. Do you guys mind just sharing a success story? No names, no context of who it could be, but just a little bit of a background and something you guys could have seen.
We see so many success stories, and it's lovely to say. And I said at the beginning, I had to write it down because I was statistics, but we had 16 graduations last year, which was incredible, and it was our highest year that we've had. Part of that was because GED was ending, so we had a little bit of a external push to get people to write their exams and graduate. Lovely success story, but my personal one that I want to share, we have a learner who, full backstory, is involved in CSSD and lost the custody of her child, unfortunately. She's a young mom, and she was connected to our program through her youth services worker. And as she started with us, she started to share her story, build some rapport and some trust in our staff and our team. And we were able to support her in ways that she didn't know she needed, and to be able to go to family court together and just be a consistent and a trusted adult that can share a space with, and to be in their corner when they need it and when they want it and how they want it, I think was the biggest thing for her. All in all, lovely story. She ended up getting supervised visitation, then having unsupervised and sleepovers, and is now working on a reunification plan, which is lovely. But all of that is through conversation and through trust and through rapport building. And a lot of that didn't come from her home life, which is unfortunate, but she was able to find that, which is lovely. She's still in our program. She got to do all of this huge life changes while still getting her education, which is lovely. And everything was at her own pace, which was, I think, the important thing.
I hate to, I don't really like Chromebooks anymore, but I think one successful thing was I would teach students who have reading difficulties. And when I started teaching, if one student had a device that would help them with reading, there would be a stigma attached to that student. Where everyone has a Chromebook, I would give them, say, a reading assignment. Okay, you have to read this. Now, this was with social studies course I used to teach. Students would have to read a passage and then, explain to me what's going on. They could have their headphones in, stuff like that. Everyone had a Chromebook. So the students who had difficulty reading could have that passage read to them. And so when I was looking at that and have the student, produce content that was accurate to the outcomes, I thought that was a great success story, that everyone had the same device. No one knew how the other was using it. People who did not have exceptionalities could use the read write function and say, oh my God, this is awesome. And then, it was more of a, this is cool, rather than a, who's using what over there. So, because junior high kids, if they can make a judgment, they'll be making a judgment. So, I thought it was actually nice to see that everyone was using this same device in a different way. And I thought that had a lot of success for students who had challenges with read write. Yeah.
I think for me, like one thing that really stands out is in Amy's class, we had to do group projects where we demonstrated one type of, each group had a different like counseling technique, and we had to create our own case study, whether it was like with a family or a couple or with a child. And we got to choose our group, and we did videos of that, and we presented all of them to the class. And it was just such a fun and a silly way to kind of demonstrate those like counseling interactions. And there was, one of the only things we had to have in those videos was there had to be a conflict and a resolution. And it was so fun to just see the way that we could all work together and like create these little skits, but actually use like social work counseling techniques in that. And it was the first time that we ever kind of did that in the degree. And it just felt like it was learning, but also just in such a creative way. And that always stands out to me when I think of, as a student in my social work degree. So that's just kind of a fun little silly one. And Tyler's group did a really fun one if he wants to further explain that.
I did want to share a story though from I guess not an educational standpoint, but something that I would call a success story that implemented those same principles. We had a youth that has selective mutism. Very difficult to apply talk therapy, and they just wouldn't really benefit from the services, right? So we could sit in silence, but no one would benefit from that. Or we could use our creative freedom, our minds, to come up with an alternative to the traditional therapy that we would offer. So we decided to ask them to paint a picture of how they're feeling instead of telling us. And that gave them the platform then to express how they felt without having to verbalize it. And I know it's not necessarily a classroom, but it's still the same principle. And anyways, I'm trying very careful not to give any identifying information, but they made a lot of progress, and it was definitely a success story. And still fresh, so still continuing to be a success story. But I think that that's my example.
Yeah, and just to further kind of jump off that, I mean, as a social worker and even a social work student in placement, I mean, I think some of the most impactful like people interactions I've had with individuals I'm supporting has been just taking a step back and being like, what can I do to best support you? And I mean, like, systems should adapt to people, not the other way around. And unfortunately, that is sometimes the world that we live in. But I'm very fortunate to be in, a career in social work where I'm able to just meet people where they are and to say, like, if something's not working for you, I'm here to help you in whatever capacity that means. So, yeah, so I guess that just goes back to what Tyler said.
We did have another question online there, specifically for Steve, but anyone feel free to comment. Do you have any suggestions as to how program specialists can support learning for teachers, specifically our French immersion teachers who may not think they need to use any UDL practices in their teaching strategies?
Well, French immersion is for everyone. So I teach students with accommodations exceptionalities. So, you know, any type of learning strategy that a teacher can do to make learning, you know, fun and engaging, whether it's, you know, for someone who's has an exceptionality or not. I think there should be ways that teachers should make learning fun or make students want to be there. So, you know, my whole teaching practice is based around be academic for those who want to be there, and be, you know, a place where students want to come. If they hate school, maybe they'll enjoy coming into Mr. Sharp's class, because, you know, I try to engage with every student to make sure they want to be there. And, you know, I've had success with that. But, yeah, I mean, any type of UDL strategy can benefit not specifically French immersion students, but any student that you may have. I think that answers the question. Anyone else? Okay.
My name is Barry Smith, and I work with the John Howard Society. So we work with people who are involved in criminal justice system. I've been a youth worker. I call myself a youth worker because I know I don't look that old, but I've been working in the community for about 25 years. I actually worked with a project with Thrive, where we was a funded grant from the federal government, Health Canada actually. We worked with 30 at-risk families that lived in the Brophy area and the Circle. Our project was to help support these children through grade 9 to grade 12. So familiar with Thrive, and I'm familiar with some of the schools in the area. We work with those. But my comment is to Tyler, your story about the plant really resonated with me, because I always used a workshop with the young people that I worked with, and that was with the sunflower seed. So we would take a sunflower seed, and I'd say, now if you take this sunflower seed, you put it in a drawer, or you put it in an envelope, nothing will ever happen, right? But if you take a sunflower seed and you try to grow it in your home and you protect it, it won't prosper. Because one of the things that a sunflower seed has to do is it has to be put into the elements where it gains. I don't know all the science behind it. I tell them, you go figure that out. But so when you put it in the elements and you provide support and whatnot, it can grow up to 9 feet tall. I did just Google just a couple of the science, the mathematics behind the seeds of a sunflower is quite amazing. Actually, it's universal. Like it's a picture of the mathematics of the universe that happens naturally, right? Just because you put the sunflower in the ground, if you look at the science behind it, the efficiency packing, golden ratio, the Fibonacci, you guys are in the math department, you should know this, the Fibonacci numbers, right? It's mimicking the universe, right? So I use that to say, you know, this education is not for this. So the reason why you and I were successful is because not we're smarter than anybody. It's because we were privileged. We're able to, people were advocating for us and whatnot, and we're able to come to university and whatnot. My question is for you guys is how can you use this whole process to help young people who are facing their biggest disability is that they're poor, right? Or that they're victims of racism, or that their parents are not privileged or whatnot. They have just as much potential as you or I, but they don't have the resources or the support. How can you use this, all this great resources and whatnot to people like me who are working with these kind of people, this population?
See, that's a tough one because again, it's working within the systems, right? And that's always so tough, especially when you're advocating for individuals who the systems doesn't work for. I found that within my social work placements and even my social work job now, that advocacy is like a big one when it comes to that. So when you're working with people who are disadvantaged in whatever way, you know, in terms of the systems that we have, I find just pushing the system with advocacy has been just a big one. It might take, you know, 8 million tries, not really, but you know, maybe a few more emails than what you would like, couple annoying phone calls. But I think like advocacy is a big one, because unfortunately, the systems don't work, and that's why, you know, a lot of us are talking or trying to implement new strategies and stuff like that. So the one big thing I think is just pushing and advocacy. That's the big one. Yeah.
Yeah, great question. And I think support and education, and just like the advocacy, are really important. When I look around and I see everybody here right now learning about UDL, everyone comes from different backgrounds, probably might work in different professions. You'll then take that knowledge and then you'll apply it to whatever service or organization that you work in. So like yourself, for instance, the youth that you work with, you can meet them where they're too, and you know the system, and you're able to figure out what way might work best for them and how to apply the principles of UDL within your own focus. So I think, to answer the question, being here and doing events like this where we provide information and share our stories, it's really, really, really important. Yeah.
So one thing I would say too about the UDL framework is that it supports culturally relevant pedagogy. And so knowing that cultural piece and allowing, you know, meeting students where they are, allowing them to leverage, you know, multiple means of engagement. How do we get students engaged? And so I think really leaning into that principle. And for those of you that have followed along with the UDL project for, I don't know, maybe the last 7 or 8 years, they actually moved, you know, the order in which the principles were presented, and they moved engagement to the top. So if you present it in order, the first thing we want to do is multiple means of engagement. And this is exactly, if you were designing or thinking about the UDL principles, how do we get them engaged? That's where I think is a wonderful opportunity, whether it's culturally or otherwise, to really think about the student or the population, the student population, and how do we get them engaged? And you can take that and again infuse any culture, any custom, and really grab on and get their attention, get them engaged. And we know that once we get them engaged, then we can take the other two guidelines and start to look at that as well. So I think looking at culturally relevant pedagogy, in which UDL supports, which is you know, an opportunity to think about that as well, and taking that back to you know, whichever population you're in, and fusing that with that culture. I know one of the first teaching assignments I had was in an inner city in Toledo, Ohio, in a youth detention center. And if we can do it in those environments, meet them where they are, listen to their stories, let them use bad language because that's culturally relevant, and not get too uptight about that, then you can do anything. And if we can do it in those really restrictive environments, racially and otherwise, you know, those underrepresented groups, those students at the margins, which is who UDL is meant to encourage and really reach, those students on the margins, you know, I think you can find a path forward from there.
We did have another question online there as well. With the movement to more neuro-affirming practices and acceptance of neurodiversity, I see this definitely overlapping with and being a key part of UDL. In your individual settings, has that understanding of neurodiversity changed, and has that impacted your UDL approach?
I'll start by saying from the K-12 standpoint, we kind of cater to what our students' needs are. So if they're, it's if it's a brain thing, then we try to accommodate to that. If it's, a mobility thing, we try to accommodate to that. So whatever, we look at students case by case and try to accommodate based on what their accommodation needs are.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I can't see the question, but I mean, the UDL framework is based in neuroscience. And so I'm not certain that you can really be a UDL practitioner and not acknowledge neurology and neuroscience. And of course, then using, staying away from things like designing for the average person. The average brain doesn't exist. And so staying away from trying to meet the needs of an average student, for example. So I think absolutely, if you're wherever you are in UDL journey, I think you absolutely have to acknowledge neurodiversity because it's really embedded and it really comes from neuroscience. And there are all kinds of frameworks that use other research, but UDL, the really exciting thing about UDL is it's embedded strongly in that neuroscience. So that's one of the things that I really like about it.
I'll say yes and no. Yes, because our accommodations in our program aren't necessarily accommodations for an individual learner. So we don't look at neurodiversity as a difference within our program because our program is fully universal in terms of how everyone works for an individual. We have that privilege because our program is very small. Our classrooms are very small. We only have a maximum of 4 students at a time in any classroom. So we have the ability to work however the learner needs to be taught or to work with. That structure is much more accommodating for us as a program, and not so much in the school system. When you have 30 students to a classroom, it's very different. So neurodiversity is a huge topic within our program, and a lot of our learners do fall within that scope of having a neurodiversity because the school system wasn't working for them. And yes, because our program is very accommodating in terms of not needing individual accommodations.
I have a question. There's a common myth that UDL means watering down content or lowering expectations. This is something we hear a lot as educators. So based on your experiences, I'm wondering how you've addressed that perception and what maybe have you seen instead?
Our program works under a standardized test. So the CAIC and the GED were standardized exams. So our level of success is standard across the board just by nature of what the examination and the credential is. So how we work with our individuals is what works for them. So in terms of content, it's solely in how an individual wants to be taught. So in terms of like watering it down, I don't believe that personally we see that in our program, but that's just because we're able to do so much more within it. Because it's standardized, there are certain benchmarks or levels that an individual has to meet to graduate. And that's one barrier that we have within our program because we personally within the progress of a curriculum, we don't have benchmarks and we don't have guidelines that we need to follow or meet. But in order to graduate, there are. But it's full standardized, which is the one barrier that we do have just by nature of the credential.
I'll just say, in my experience, not only did it not lower the rigor, my use of UDL actually increased the rigor. So again, as I said earlier, the way I try to look at it is product and process. The product, those learning outcomes, those are non-negotiables, right? So that's your standard. The process is how students are going to meet that standard. So you're not lowering the standards. You're giving multiple ways to meet that standard. I think you absolutely could, if you weren't careful, water it down and change the outcomes, the learning outcomes, but that's not really what you, and in my experience, again, I shared about those horrible PowerPoints. Rigor was raised tenfold when I got rid of that PowerPoint group work and let students pick. I had students do a documentary on disability. They have a family member with lived experience. They did a documentary. And so they saved me really from having to just walk through this PowerPoint. So for me, and I know there's literature to support this, it actually not only maintains rigor, it could actually increase rigor if you do it in a careful way.
Yeah, I mean, just based on like a student perspective, I mean, you can really see that it's noticeable when people are really engaged in, the material. I don't think there has been any noticeable watering down, based on our class with Amy. I mean, people are so engaged, especially when you give them creative ways of being able to do the things that they want to do. I mean, yeah.
I agree. I couldn't tell you what I've read in a textbook 2 years ago, but I can tell you what I've done in Amy's class. And it's because I think you retain, when you have that choice, when you get that creative freedom, you retain that more because you were a part of that process. And I think that's really, I think it's not watered down. It's not lowering expectation. It's just providing resources so that people can meet those expectations. It could be something as simple as visual supports, right? In a textbook, flowcharts, diagrams, those give you the same information, just in a different format. It doesn't mean it's watered down.
I think we have time for one more question. If there's anyone who has a burning thought or reflection in the group. Andrea was first.
I am monopolizing. This is really truly more of a comment than a question, so you'll all be off the hook. But I'm just picking up so many threads that are weaving together out of what's been said today. And we all know that learning doesn't just take place in the classroom, right? Obviously, we all know this. We're talking about structures that are applied to formal learning, but I think what's happening beyond just those experiences and experiments with how learners can learn is also a kind of modeling by the instructors that I think is really has the potential to make such a huge difference. Things like taking the time to get to know the learners well enough to know who should and shouldn't be in a group together, who's going to be productive, to be able to offer support to someone who hasn't experienced support like that, to find a way for a child to express themselves when they can't do the typical mode. And really what we're talking about is respect and the humility to say maybe these other people in this classroom know how they can learn more than I do as the instructor. And so I think beyond just the, getting the grade 12 math or getting the BA or whatever it might be and these milestones, there's something so much bigger that happens when that respect is extended to learners. And I think that, not to be corny, but we're looking at, UDL. I mean, it's kind of an ultimate design for life, really, in terms of how we can be to one another. So I think the lesson here that I'm taking is just this is so much bigger than teaching and learning. This is kind of everything.
Well, we want to thank our panelists who have done an absolutely exceptional job sharing stories and experiences of how UDL is being applied locally. So a big round of applause for all of our panelists. As we wrap up today's launch, I want to thank you all for being here, folks online as well, folks in person. And I hope that we'll take time to really reflect on what was shared today. I think Darla gave us a very clear picture about what it can look like when institutions really commit to UDL in a meaningful way by creating dedicated roles, building accessible resources, offering professional learning, and making space for the work to grow. So I think these kinds of supports can really help the conditions to do UDL in our everyday practice. So I think that's a really key takeaway for the folks in the room that get to do some of the decision making. And our panelists also added to that picture by showing us or telling us about what UDL looks like in practice in not just classrooms, but in community work, which is just as important, and service settings. And also it was so encouraging to hear from our students always who are already applying UDL in their work and seeing the impact beyond academic spaces. Very proud of both of you for being so flexible with service users in your work. And we also heard very reflective comments about limitations of the accommodation model. And while accommodations remain necessary in many cases, as Jason pointed out, which I think is very important, they often place a burden on individuals to navigate systems that are often very inaccessible. So another reason why UDL is important as it offers us a proactive approach. So we hope that you'll all stay connected with us. We have some refreshments out in the hall, and we'll set up some space in the hall so that we can eat outside of the room. Please say hello before you leave. We would love to get to know you. Follow us along online and join us this fall for the sessions that we have lined up. And again, thank you all so much for coming and your participation, and we hope that we continue to be in community with all of you. Oh, and Lindsay just reminded me, we would love it if you would take the time to fill out our feedback survey. So you can find the QR code on the back. We would love to hear about your experience at the launch, both online and in person. We will share the link to the feedback survey in the chat. We want to improve our sessions moving forward and make sure they continue to be accessible for our community members. So we promise the feedback survey is not very long, but really helps us in terms of our future planning.